I'm the bad guy. I'm the, I'm the, I'm the bad.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Across the Gridiron. I'm Matt, and I am joined, as ever, by the main man, Eddie Equo. Eddie, how you doing, my friend?
I'm very good, Matt. It's been a post-drama free draft. After the
Post-drama
draft,
free draft. Don't you mean post-draft? Oh, actually,
post-draft, there was somewhere in my head where the order of those words
yeah.
actually
Would you like to start this again, Eddie?
basically, right, all the hype that leads up to the draft, right? Everyone could just kind of calm down and get into the blues, right? Because you start to figure out your team didn't do as much as you thought they were going to do. You start to hear what all the experts are saying about all the draft picks, and then you fall further into the blues of your team and thinking that it's all doom and gloom before it starts. Or, your certain teams that will feel like they've absolutely hit the jackpot. Looking at those Eagles fans right now who can't stop talking. They'll be thinking they've hit the jackpot, they're gonna go back to the Super Bowl and they're gonna start a run to create a dynasty. You might be one of those teams, but either way, you're welcome to the podcast today.
So, for most other professional podcasters you guys may be listening to, if someone fumbles the ball as badly as Eddie did just then, we would normally stop, record, and stop, re-record, and crack on again. That's what you expect from a professional podcast, but not us here at Across the Gridiron. We will power through no matter what mistakes we make or whatever nonsense we come up with over the course of this intro. So, yeah, so thank you for that intro, Eddie, I think. I think so what we wanted to do today, we wanted to shift gears a little bit from the drama filled draft or the draft filled drama, whatever Eddie would call it, to look at sort of what's next, right? What's next
Yeah.
in the calendar, and that is the rookie minicamp. So we've got fresh faces, we've got rising stars. Some teams we've got the start of something big or the start of something potentially depressing and all hype but no trousers, which I'm sure is a saying somewhere. So we're going to answer some of the bigger sort of questions today. We're going to look at who's ready to make an instant impact in this season's NFL. So Eddie, what are your thoughts? Who do you think is ready so far?
So I think, minicamp, for me is really about more about how players are looking as they're walking into camp, right? You start to hear the whispers, from the so-called NFL experts, the reporters. They're talking about how the guy goes into the room, how mature he is. You start hearing quotes, from players, who are like, they're about to change the culture. They're going to go into the team and they're going to be gunning for heads and all of those sort of things start coming out in minicamp. And, you don't know what to make of it, right? Because I think, in my view, after the draft is over, if you get into the team, if you're drafted by a team, either as part of the draft process or you're an undrafted free agent, there's almost like a level playing field right now because now it's about, what you can do when you get on the pitch. And if you perform, you're going to make the team. And this is always very intriguing, to see because you start to hear about, whether, some players who have been drafted in this season, they are doing a lot of the reps with the first teamers, or they're doing a lot of the reps with, the people that are in the second team or the third team, because every team has a depth chart, so you've got three or four quarterbacks, in a particular team, and you're trying to figure out which quarterback is probably going to be the number one starter on week one. So minicamp is all about that, and for me, it starts to get a bit more exciting once the fixtures get announced, and we're gonna talk about that soon. But Matt, just going to your question, who do I think that's gonna have the most impact? Now, if you look at last season, look at the quarterbacks that got drafted. We had Bo Nix, who got drafted. You had Michael Penix Jr. for the Falcons. And that was also a weird situation because they had just handed Kirk Cousins a lot of money. So everyone was thinking, okay, is he going to make an impact? He had Jaden Daniels, who was high up in the draft. He had Caleb Williams, who everybody thought was going to actually, perform. And you could argue that out of all of those quarterbacks that went in, Bo Nix would have been the offensive rookie of the year. I mean, we talked about him quite a bit, on the show. If not that Jaden Daniel was absolutely out of the water. So naturally, you want to lean to quarterbacks and say which quarterback is going to have the most impact. Now, last year, you might realize that they picked in the first 31 spots, I think it was first 31, there were six quarterbacks that were picked. This season, in the first 144, there were only six quarterbacks picked. So it kind of gives you a picture about, the strength of the quarterbacks and maybe how potentially ready those quarterbacks are to make an impact. I think most people might think that, the person who might make the most impact is Cam Ward, right? The Titans need a quarterback. We know that they have no confidence in Will Levis. And so he's most likely to start day one. But I think all the other quarterbacks, you're going to be looking for things to happen within their teams, whether it's injury, loss of form or backups and things like that, for them to get on the pitch. But I would say that all the quarterbacks that have been drafted are going to play at some point this year because of what everyone is saying about next year, right? There's going to be lots of good quarterbacks in next year. So you want to know what you have, right? If you've got a good quarterback and whether they are going to actually make a difference. Non-quarterbacks aside, I think the obvious choice is Travis Hunter. Everyone will be looking for him to play immediately. And actually, when you're not a quarterback, it is a more chance of you actually getting on the field week one, right? Because everyone knows that quarterback is the hardest position to play. But if you're a running back, if you're a wide receiver, if you're a cornerback or a linebacker, or even someone in the offensive line, you could actually be starting week one. So I look at a lot of the players that have been selected. The Dolphins did Kenneth Grant, right? He looks like an explosive player, and he looks like he's gonna have to start in week one because you just look at that area that has been an area of weakness for the Dolphins. So a lot of teams that are drafting for areas of weakness, I would expect those teams to play the draft picks almost immediately. Ashton Genty, right? You expect the Raiders are going to play him from week one, right? And he would have an impact. Although people have said that the Raiders don't have a very strong offensive line. So, and you need a good offensive line to really see, how you're running back. But considering that they had the lowest yards per carry, from last season, I would expect that Ashton Jenkins is going to make an impact. I mean, surely if you move them from the bottom of their running stats to anywhere, into the middle, of the pack, then that's an impact, right? And then you now look at, people like the Dallas Cowboys who've got an offensive line, Tyler Booker going into the house of the Tylers. You would expect that he's going to make some impact because, effectively that's an area of weakness. So I think non-quarterbacks, for me, would probably be making the most impact in this as we approach week one and probably for the rest of the season. But it'll be curious to see what everyone thinks because most fans right now, they don't know what to make of their draft picks, and so you're waiting for really you want to wait for preseason really to start to see how they look on a proper field.
Yeah, no, I think I think you made a lot of good points in there. I think that look, we know going back to what you were saying about the quarterbacks, we know that this year's intake of quarterbacks has not been the strongest, right? And we know that next year's influx are going to be considerably stronger. So I think a lot of the quarterbacks who have been drafted aren't they're not apart from Cam Ward, they're not going into mini season. So they're not going into mini camps to nail down a starting role. They're just trying to get a spot on the roster, right? They're trying to playing for second choice, even third choice at the moment. We've talked about a few teams last week who have got 5 or 6 quarterbacks going into these camps. So they are playing for a second, third choice, and they are playing for backups. So for them, it's just about getting reps in, showing what they can do, how far they can throw it, how accurate they can throw it, and you make a few good um, points about some of the other positions because again, quarterbacks they'll get snaps in preseason, but when it comes to week one of the regular season, they're not going to be getting many. You can sub in a wide receiver or a running back or a cornerback. You can bring those in and just face a few snaps, ease them into the NFL a little bit more. So it will be interesting to see over the course of this sort of mini camp who's getting the most snaps, who is being the most productive on the field, right? But one of the questions I want to move on next, what do we think these mini camps, these rookie mini camps, actually tell us? What do we think they actually reveal? It's not full contact. Full contact comes, way, way sort of down the line. They've all
Yeah.
got their massive like mushroom, um, helmets on. What do we think we actually expecting to see from these mini camps?
I think it's the storylines, right? It's the storylines that come out of minicamp, those undrafted free agents, who are making waves, in a team, those underlining emotional stories that come from a player who was picked maybe in the seventh round, right? A player who was supposedly to be picked high up, in the draft and then falls down, sort of to the lower rounds, of the draft. It's those storylines that people are looking, to pick up. They want to make sure that no one's getting injured, right? So, we had a lot of, drafts picks last season. Remember JJ McCarthy, he got injured as well before he even got started into the season. And a lot of teams will be hoping that they don't bite any of that, as part of the mini camp. So for me, mini camp is about storylines. What's really going to be intriguing, especially this mini camp, is really what's going to happen in the Cleveland Browns because we
Mhm.
talked about it last season. They've got 5 quarterbacks right now in their room, right? They've got Joe Flacco, they've got Pickett, who's also there, who they traded for.
Mhm.
Then they also have the 2 rookies, that they also brought into the team, and now you're thinking to yourself, right? With all the noise that has gone about Shador Sanders, right? Everyone is going to be zeroing in on who's actually getting the most reps in minicamp, right? Who's the
Mhm.
one that is leaning towards who's most likely, to be getting the starting position in week one. So people are going to be wanting to hear how they are coming in, is it showing the work ethic? Is it all about the flash? Is it all about the cameras, for Shador? Can he actually make the team? And I think the storyline is going to be about that. Is he actually doing more to get into the team? So you see that potentially going to be played out in the Browns as well. Now you look at other teams, right? You look at the Titans. Right, they've drafted Cam Ward. It was clear that he was going to be the number one, right? Everyone be talking about it. Now people are going to be wanting to see whether Will Levis, who's still in the team, is going to win his job back, right? Is Will Levis going to be the number one, starter in week one? Or is it going to be Cam Ward, who's going to, super, seed him? There will be other situations like New England Patriots. Drake May will be feeling very happy. They didn't draft really a quarterback in the high round. So he'll be thinking, I've got a good chance of starting in week one. Now, they did draft a quarterback much later as well. So everyone's going to be interested to see what that dynamic is. Have they gotten enough weapons to support him, going forward? Caleb Williams, is he going to push on, in the Bears, this second season after the Bears, decided to draft a tight end in this draft, which, was very curious, to everyone, unless this tight end who's going to become Travis Kelsey. Most people would have been expecting that they would have drafted some other skill position to help them. So for me, mini camps is more about the storylines, about making sure that you make it, like you say, to week one as part of the roster. But other than that, there's not a lot to pick out from here because it's not contact. You're not really playing against oppositions. Preseason starts to give people a little bit more of an inkling about who's going to make it in the long run.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Just want to move on. I just want to really throw a spanner in the works for you right now because I want to just change the running order that you've got, and I want to talk about from a fan's perspective.
Yeah.
So, what, in your opinion, again, as a diehard fan yourself, I know obviously what my opinion is, but what is it about these mini camps that the fans just love? What is it that brings people out? And we've seen Hard Knocks, we've seen those things that these training camps, the fans come in there hundreds, if not thousands, to watch these mini camps. What is it about them that really sort of engages the fans?
I think it's the viral clips, right? This is the age of social media, right? You're gonna see some one-handed catches that are gonna make it onto TikTok, or Instagram or Twitter, right? You're gonna see some bomb that a quarterback throws, and those are the things that fans are getting hyped about, right? You want to see that new rookie, doing something that gives you hope, that makes you feel like your team made the right call, in the draft, even though you were looking for a wide receiver. But if you see that guard that has been selected, shoving people all over the place, you're feeling a little bit better about going into the season. So for the fans, it's about the buzz, it's about the hype, who's coming out as a legit, who is already being crowned a Hall of Famer before he's even taken a snap, who's taking the team to the Super Bowl. That's what we fans are looking for. And of course, we want to get those jerseys, right? We want to see the squad numbers, right? You heard about the story, for the player who was asking for LT's number, from the Giants, which was just like, very funny. And LT was like, what are you talking about, right? Go and make your number for yourself, right? Those are the sort of things. I remember when CD Lamb, got into the Dallas Cowboys, and there was so much noise about 88. Of all the people who have, won the number 88, Michael Irvin, the Des Bryant. And, it was almost like, is CD Lamb going to wear 88? And almost, there was a big sort of, buzz about it. And then, obviously he was given the blessing by the 88 group, that he can then carry on, the mantle of that. So there's going to be a lot of that, going around, teams to be looking at legend numbers, who are probably unoccupied in their teams and seeing you draft prospect and projecting that these draft prospects are going to actually take on those numbers and magically become like the players that they all love, in the old. So I think it's a little bit about that. For fans, there's not much for us to cheer about, so we have to look for the buzz. We have to look for those viral clips in the minicamp.
No, I agree. I think for me, the NFL season is an incredibly short season, right?
Yeah.
You know, compare it to say, in the UK, compare it to the Premier League, you've got at least 38 games, cup games, European games if you're a top team. You look at basketball or you look at baseball in the US, they play like 300 games each or whatever. The NFL is an incredibly short season, right? So and it doesn't last that long, right? So obviously having the preseason, the build up, fans don't get to watch football that often, really. So it's the anticipation. The rookie mini camps really just become part of the season,
Mm,
right? And all the anticipation, all the excitement, all the build up, it really just helps create that buzz. Especially again, this is what the NFL do better. I think what the NFL do better than pretty much any sport out there is they market their product amazingly. We see how much the draft is now, how much of an event that is because they market it superbly and they built the hype for the draft. But another thing when it comes to the preseason, again, they market it superbly, right? And the Hard Knocks in itself, as a TV program, that becomes one of the most talked about things across the
Yeah,
whole league for a few years.
yeah.
I've already been looking to see which team is going to be on Hard Knock and hoping it's going to be the Browns,
We want the Browns.
but
We
it can't.
definitely want the Browns.
But this thing, it can't be. They're ineligible because they've got rules. They've got a pool of teams of who it could
Yeah.
be, and they all sound pretty boring.
The Pittsburgh's there because it'd be interesting to see if they get Aaron Rodgers, right?
Mhm.
Because there's all this talk about Pittsburgh getting Aaron Rodgers. And basically, they've been waiting for Aaron Rodgers. Probably the reason why
Yeah.
Sanders didn't get drafted.
Well, they could
So,
be. I mean, you look at the so I'll even read out the teams for you. These are the 20 teams who are currently eligible for Hard Knocks, and you tell me who you would like to see out of these.
okay,
In the East, you've got the Bills or the Dolphins.
okay,
Obviously, Dolphins for me, but don't think anyone
yeah,
else cares. The North, you've got the Bengals, the Ravens, and as you said, the Steelers, which will be
okay,
interesting.
yeah,
You've got the Colts, the Texans, and the Titans in the
yeah,
South. Titans might get some of that first round pick, Cam Ward. And the West, you've got the Broncos or the Chiefs. Who cares about the Chiefs?
yeah.
Then you've got the NFC, you've got the Commanders, the Eagles, and the Giants. So basically anyone in your league other than the Cowboys. You've got the Packers and the Vikings in the north, Falcons and the
Okay.
Panthers in the south, and the 49ers, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks in the west.
So you're looking for compelling stories. You're looking for a bit of drama, right? So Pittsburgh, I think if you're looking at the AFC, Pittsburgh seems the whole most appealing because everyone wants to see what's the next chapter of this Aaron Rodgers saga.
But they had that last year. They had it with the Jets last
I
year.
know, right? This
So,
is gonna be like a Netflix show, right? Where you got
yeah,
season.
Hard Knocks becomes the bloody Aaron Rodgers show. Jesus Christ.
So maybe there's a bit of that. Maybe, right, the story, because it might be too obvious to go to the Eagles, right? They've won the Super Bowl. So I don't think that anyone is expecting some kind of jeopardy, from that side. But maybe, the story might be in the Titans, right? They've taken the number one pick, so they could potentially have some story there to spin. You might want to look at the Lions, right? How do they recover from what seemed like they went all in, last season, basically to get to the Super Bowl and they fell short. How are they recovering? How have they been able to keep some players? They've lost some players as well. So that could be that. 49ers could be another compelling story, right? They had an awful, awful season. And then there's the whole conversation about Brock Purdy. Is he going to get paid, or not? So perhaps that might be a compelling story. I just want to see chaos. That's what Hard Knocks is for me. I want to see chaos. I want to see the players who are, the loud ones, who are the ones making the waves, the ones that are getting under the coach's skin, and the ones that already think that they might be heading to the Super Bowl and are going to fall flat in the first week.
Yeah, see, for me, the two that I'd be interested in seeing, I'm not interested in seeing the Titans. We had the Bears last year, and it was all about the rookie first round pick
Yeah.
Q1. We've seen that last year. I'd be interested to see the Commanders or the Broncos
Okay.
because what I think would be because they had two rookie QBs who defied expectations last year.
Hmm.
Right, Broncos got to the playoffs with Bo Nix. Commanders got there with Jada Daniels better than anybody would have thought to do. I would be interested to see now how they plan to move on. It'll be interesting to see how Nix and how Daniels how they lead that team.
Hmm.
They've had one amazing year, but sometimes we know the second season can be more difficult.
Yeah.
So
Sophomore
I
slump.
so so I would be interested in seeing that. But going back to the original point, the fact that this Hard Knock show becomes such a staple now of the NFL production, of the NFL season, that is another reason why people just love these mini camps so much.
Yeah.
Because they do such an amazing job with it. But look, let's move on. Let's sort of end this half with let's look at one specific team, right? What we'll try and do is every week we'll try and pick one team and we'll just look at, you know, what can we expect during a mini camp? What have we seen during a mini camp? What do we expect from the rookies? Now, I will have to keep reminding the audience that this is not a Dallas Cowboys podcast. However, just to give Eddie his 5 minutes, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. So, Eddie, what do we expect? What do you, as a somewhat casual Dallas Cowboys fan, right? What are you expecting to see from the mini camp?
Listen, I'm expecting the return of the era of the triplets, all right? I know we don't have a triplets right now, but the more I have been thinking about this Cowboys draft class, the more I've been thinking maybe it isn't such a bad draft class. Now, I understand that they've just got an undrafted rookie, a wide receiver, and we know how Dallas Cowboys always locks in on those type of players, right? If everyone remembers, Tony Romo was an undrafted player before he became the starter for the Dallas Cowboys. And the Dallas Cowboys have found success. When it comes to the draft, they always seem to do well. And then they try and, mess it up by not paying their stars and all of that. But if we just focus on just the draft alone, there's always a tendency that the Dallas Cowboys draft well. Now, this year, they've drafted a number of players that potentially are going to be turning heads, right? We've got the House of the Tylers, and already this guy is looking like a leader. He's looking like Zach Martin just from appearance. Obviously, he's not played any snap yet, but he's already making all the right noises when it comes to coming into a franchise like the Dallas Cowboys, the spectacle that it is, the size and scale the Dallas Cowboys is, and the fact that when you play for American's team, you're always going to be on the spotlight, and he does seem like the kind of person that has the charisma as well. Another intriguing, element about the Cowboys is that they've had cornerbacks that have actually been Pro Bowl players, but they've been caught by injuries. We talk about Deron Bland, who had that phenomenal, season where he was taking picks after picks, and sending them to the house. And then don't forget there was Trevon Diggs as well, who was, making interceptions as if he was going out of fashion, right? Those two players have been hit by injuries a lot. And now the Dallas Cowboys have signed a player in Siobhan Revell, who is also coming off an injury, so he does beg the question, right? What are we doing here? But, all indications suggesting that he's healing quite well. And it seems like we might start to have a strong secondary position because when you think about our division, right, you think about the quarterbacks that we're gonna have to face. Jaden Daniels. We're going to be facing Jalen Hurts with AJ Brown and the rest. You really want to have a good cornerback if you're going to be doing something. So for me, started hearing noises about him. I'm really, really impressed. Now, everyone is talking about Blue. Blue might be the color, right? We've got a running back called Blue, and this one's gonna be, potential to have lots of memes, right? We're talking about the viral and buzz, with players. Blue is potentially someone that, we might just have on earth, a running back. Now, I have heard that he does have fumble tendencies, right, which is not great. So that is something that I'm gonna be watching, for him to see does he actually get over the fumbles that he's been known with. But I think the player that everyone is really, really getting excited about is the pass rusher, right? This is a player that and all the noise about Micah Parsons, which I mean, I don't know why the Cowboys do this every single season, right? We play this tape every time. Are you gonna pay your starters, right? And they eventually do. But then they just let it drag on. Last season it was Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. This season is Micah Parsons. But we've got a player in our pass rush who I think that potentially he's going to be a replacement for DeMarco Lawrence because DeMarco Lawrence has left, the Cowboys. Obviously, in the offseason, he's moved on to another team. So the Cowboys now are a little bit short in that department. Now they've still got, players like Sam Williams there, they've still got Overshawn and Neelan. But for me, I think that I'm trying very hard to be able to pronounce his name because I don't actually want to butcher it, but I should actually know how to say his name quite well because He's a Nigerian descent. The Cowboys pass
If
rusher. Yeah.
if there was only somebody on the call of Nigerian descent
Who could
who could maybe say that name probably because I tell you, it's not me.
who could say his name properly? I can't. I'm not gonna butcher his name, right? I'm gonna practice, right? And then next time when we come, I am gonna say his name fluently. But after I've done a bit of practice. But I am expecting good things. And I think like the Cowboys have always excelled in some of these positions when it comes to pass rushing. You know, positions like that, I feel like we've always got lucky the last couple of drafts. So I fully expect, something great, with this player as well. But listen, everyone is talking about wide receivers with the Dallas Cowboys and whether we're going to have, I hear that there might be a trade in the offing for Tyreek Hill. People have been talking
No,
about
no,
people have
no.
been talking about Tyreek Hill potentially going to the Dallas. Just imagine this man, Tyreek Hill wearing the stars, of the Dallas Cowboys, with all the, what that comes with it. Surely that's very tempting for any player.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it is to be hyped up beyond all imagine and flame out just as brightly. Yeah. No, I mean, look, you're still America's team. I get it, but no, I mean, look, I think that you guys have had a pretty solid off season, right? I think it's fair to say, you've drafted well, got a few good signs on free agent. I think you've just got, as everybody watching this podcast will know, you have a giant Jerry Jones shaped blocker to aspirations this year. The whole thing with Mika Parsons shows that hasn't really learned from from the last couple of years, and the almost the one thing that you can rely on in the NFL these days is Jerry Jones finding some way to throw a spanner in the works of the Dallas Cowboys. So look, you've had a very solid start, and yeah, as I said, it will be really interesting to see how it goes. But there's so much drama behind the scenes, and as always. So just be interested if that can stay behind the scenes and it doesn't affect what's on the field, then I think you could be in line for a decent season, but we'll just have to see how that goes.
Yeah, there's no chance that Jerry Jones staying in the going into the back room and not being in the spotlight. That's all Jerry Jones is all about. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
not gonna happen. So
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Eddie, let's call time on part one there. We said we'd try and make it a short and sweet podcast today. That's not already not happening. But we'll be back in part two where we'll look at the a few other things to do in the mini camp and also look at the schedule. So see you in a bit.
I'm the, I'm the, I'm the.
Okay, welcome back to part two of Across the Gridiron, where we are specifically today looking at the mini camps and what rookies are going to stand out. So let's try and wrap up the conversations about the mini camps in particular, Eddie, and let's just focus again on the rookies to watch. So who is your sort of top one, top three real sort of rookies that you are looking at specifically in the mini camps?
yeah, and I know when this question is asked, and for a lot of people, you would be thinking about a lot of the flashy players, the players who have, been highly talked about, who everyone expects to perform. But I think for me, the rookie to watch is the tight end for the Chicago Bears, Colston Loveland, because it was a bit of a head scratcher. And, I'm very, very curious to see how this shapes out in Chicago Bears. I've got a friend who's a Bears fan, we talked about this a little bit, and there's a lot of noise and a lot of excitement about him. Now, potentially, he might supposedly be a very, very good player. But, it's very rare that, teams will select as their first round pick, a tight end, right?
Mhm.
If you're doing, for those who play fantasy draft, will be very aware of this. Typically, right, you go for the player that is going to score you a lot of points. So actually, in fantasy draft, you see wide receivers and running backs go first, right? And in real life, it's a little bit like that, right? People go for the players who are gonna have the most impact. So your quarterbacks, or someone in your interior line, or one of those skill players like wide receiver and running back. When you do select a tight end in your first round pick, that does put a lot of spotlight. So I am very interested to see, how he performs, right? And if he performs anywhere near to the level, then the Bears, may have just, changed the trajectory of their franchise in terms of now they've got their quarterback of the future, and now they are building to become a respectable team in terms of moving forward. I'm also interested, like I said, to see what's going to happen with Kenneth Grant, who's been drafted by, the Dolphins. I've got, I've heard a lot of things, and people actually say that he's probably the best defensive player in this draft class. So there is a lot of potential, and I'm very, very curious to see, how that plays out. Um, I think that, Travis Hunter is obviously the obvious one for everyone, who potentially might be the offensive rookie of the year. But for me, it's if I want to give order of players that I really want to see this season, it would be Carson Loveland, it will be Kenneth Grant, and then of course it would be Travis Hunter. More from the curiosity perspective of which side of the ball would they play him the most? Are they going to play him as an offensive player, or are they going to play him as a defensive player? Personally for the Dallas Cowboys, I want to see how the Tyler performs, right? Tyler Booker. I want to see how he performs. Does he slot into that guard position? And does the Cowboys line start to look formidable again, where Dak Prescott, becomes that MVP like player? Because I think a lot of people are disrespecting him a little bit. He had a bit of an injury, and of course, the Eagles went ahead and won the Super Bowl. So those for me are the players that I'm looking forward to see.
Yeah, I think you make some good points. I think that look, I think everyone's always going to have focus on the big picks, the Lock and Hunter, the two I think everyone's going to have eyes on, and what we've mentioned a couple of times, and it's more to do with the celebrity side of things. But Shador Sanders, I think everyone's going to be keeping an eye on him. Drafted so far down compared to what compared to where he thought he was going to be and where his dad thought he was going to be. He's going in purely looking at draft pick, draft, based on draft picks. He's going in as the fifth choice quarterback to the Browns, right? And if you include Deshaun Watson, because who knows what's going on with that guy and where he's going to be, but there's going to be lots of eyeballs on him. He's basically is he playing for a place? He's obviously trying to force a place into the main roster, but he's challenging with another rookie who was picked like 30 places or so above him, right? So there's going to be a huge amount of eyes on him, whether fairly, unfairly, whether he's brought a lot of it on himself or his dad's brought a lot on it for him. But I think that that's just going to be a big story that I think a lot of people are going to be watching. Um, Okay, I think that's just pretty much covered the rookie mini camps, certainly from a preview standpoint. And I think we're going to be looking at these every single week to see what news is coming out and see what sort of hot takes can be derived out from the mini camps as they go on. But let's just change tack a little bit. Let's shift the conversation a little bit to end this week, and let's talk about the schedule drop. So May 14th. The schedule is being dropped. Um, we could probably talk about this again sort of next week. Because by the time we record next week, it still won't have dropped, but we know when it's coming. Let's have a look and preview some of the matches that you would love to see. So Eddie, I mean, who would set your heart racing? What are some of the matchups that you would love to see in the 25 season?
Right, give me chaos, right? Give me the Bills, give me the Chiefs, right? I want to see another showdown of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. They've been a bit quiet in the offseason. They're probably, cooking in their lab, wanting to come back and show everyone that, hey, I know you guys are, fascinated about these new guys, these new kids that have come into the block, but hey, listen, we run this show, right? And depending on who you talk to, they are potentially number one and number two best quarterbacks in the league, right? So I want to see that. I want to see that potentially as a showdown. But also, I am always quite keen in that first game. I want to see conference, division opponents go head to head. The reason why is because when you win that first game against a conference opponent, that actually counts, later on in the season. Because remember, when they do the seedings for who's seeded number one and two, they always look at how you've performed within your conference. So, for me, selfishly, I always want two conference, opponents to go because then you start to know that you've got one over, your opponent. So the Chiefs and the Bills would be something that I'd love to see. And then sticking with that theme, I would love to see the Lions and the Eagles. I would like to see that rematch again because I think the Lions will feel, had done the way that that game went. And so I think they will have revenge on their mind more to just put that bad taste, out of their mouth and say, hey, listen, you beat us on your way to the Super Bowl, but we are going to reestablish, our dominance back in the NFC. Because I think everyone was expecting the Lions to go all the way they started last season, pummeling everyone, including my beloved Dallas Cowboys. But I would love to see that matchup again. Selfishly, the matchup that I would like to see is the Cowboys and the Commanders. And that's because I haven't seen Dak go against Jaden Daniels quite yet, because obviously Dak got injured. And, Dak has played pretty much, Jalen Hurts, Dak owns Jalen Hurts. So, listen, I know people are gonna say they've won the Super Bowl and all of that, but he hasn't beaten Dak
We did.
properly yet, So until he does that, he can just calm down, right? So, Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys, I want to see how the Dallas Cowboys performs against that team because I think everyone would say right now that the Eagles are probably number one in the division, right? And then number two is going to be between the Cowboys or the Commanders. I want to set to that debate pretty much early, right? Cowboys play the Commanders. We beat them by something like, 30 points or something like that. Calms everyone down, puts Jaden Daniels officially in the sophomore slump, the second year slump for the QB. And then, peace is restored, order is restored in the NFC East. So, I would love to see that match.
Wow. I mean, not quite sure what fancy planet you're living on, Eddie, but or whatever you're taking, I'd love to take it too. It would make this San Pellegrino, which is what I'm drinking today, go down a lot easier. Uh,
Yeah.
but I do love the false hype and misplaced optimism of football fans.
I think everyone will love it, right? Everybody wants to see, who's the top dog in the NFC is. And I think that, there are matchups, right? Okay, I know normally, right, they always do a bit of a Super Bowl rematch, right? Between, the team that both teams that went to the Super Bowl. So Eagles, Chiefs, could be another one that people might want to see, right? And to be fair, I wouldn't mind not I wouldn't mind seeing that because I think, it would be an opportunity for the Chiefs to reestablish their dominance, to say, hey, listen, you got us in the Super Bowl, but hey, don't get it twisted. We are still the ones that are running the league. So that potentially would be a match that, would want to see. Let me ask you, what match would you want to see if you could orchestrate the fixtures as it's coming out on the 14th?
Someone, okay, let's say the Dolphins and say the Panthers. get a nice, easy win. Starters just break the team in, nice and easy, no worries. Same or the Dolphins. Well, the one I would like to see would be funny to see the Dolphins and the Cowboys. That would be funny. But we're saving that for the Super Bowl, aren't we, Eddie?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, saving that one for the
that's the
Super
Super
Bowl.
Bowl. Yeah, we'll save that for the Super Bowl. But I like the way that you've sort of gone, hey, listen, I don't want the Dolphins to have a difficult game. I just want an easy win, set us off. You're not about the matchups or anything like that.
No,
It's just
God, no. Right, I don't think of it as deeply as you. It's like again in our football is that what you often do is you'll in your preseason games you'll often play games for two or three divisions below you,
yes,
right?
feel
But
confident.
it doesn't
Yeah.
really work for the Arsenals of the world now because they just jet set off all over the world and play all these money spinning games in
So,
Malaysia or India or America, and then players complain that they're tired. I went, no shit, no wonder they're tired. You've been traveling all over the world to do all these friendlies. But for the teams I follow, like Sheffield Wednesday, and you can see up there, we always play teams in like League One, League Two conference just to try and ease us in. Now, this works if you go and win those games 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, smash them out the park, get a few good couple of victories, it really boosts morale. But if you then go and play these teams and draw 0-0 or lose, it has the complete opposite effect. So I'm saying it'd be great for the Dolphins to play someone like the Panthers, but then Panthers going absolutely dickers, right? It would be the completely opposite, and it would be absolute meltdown
yeah.
throughout Florida.
And the Panthers were sneaky good towards the end, right? Remember
Yes.
they were winning a few games. Bryce Young seemed to have turned the corner.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I said the Panthers in sort of jest because I couldn't really think of anybody else, but I have a lot of time for the Panthers, and I think that I like the fact that they were coming into their own a bit. I like the fact that Bryce Young was having a bit of a winning streak because I think he's deserved a bit of you know he's deserved.
Maybe you might want the Jets, right? You might want the Jets early
Oh,
on.
of course, the Jets. Oh, the Jets. Oh, you'll smash them at the park. We're gonna smash them twice in the league. Yeah. Tell you what, no. Let's get the Jets in.
Yeah,
Let's rest Tua, bring in Zach Wilson, right? With that ludicrous zero on his chest,
yeah,
right? Let him start throwing haymakers, spirals, over the shoulder, backwards, whatever. Let him wipe the floor of the Jets. That would be funny. But look, I think let's call it. I think we best call it time there for this week. It's been good chatting to you as ever, Eddie, on
yeah.
this. But as I said, mini camp, so almost upon us. The draft is done. We are now heading full steam towards the 2025 season. And thank you again for watching and listening to me and Eddie in probably the most unprofessional, chaos way possible, giving you our thoughts on mini camps as we look forward to this season. Like, share, subscribe, whatever. Leave us a nice comment towards me. Say whatever the hell you want about Eddie. It doesn't bother me. But thank you for watching. And Eddie, as always, take us home.
Right. So we've got rookies flashing, we've got coaches evaluating, we've got fans overhyping, all the draft picks, so that the NFL schedule is about to drop. Now, don't forget to hit us, on that follow, subscribe, like, hit us in the comments as well, because we would love to know what you think. But remember, it's just me, right? And so, every rookie is a legend until the pads come on. So just remember that if you're a team, already feeling great about your draft picks, or you're a team that is feeling very, very low about your draft pick, but what we can guarantee is that the NFL is kicking up and is kicking off with a blast. So, stay tuned with us and we'll love to take you on this journey as well.
I'm the bad guy. I'm the